larger than fat.
Yeah, there was a big fascination with what was there. So let's talk about another thing. So, Atlantis. When you say Atlantis to the average person, they'll say beautiful resort, Bahamas or Dubai. Yeah. But when you say Atlantis to someone like you think a complete different thing, right? Here's a couple images that you'll see, and videos we'll see, and what existed. So civilization with all these times, how many, based on what you know, what you've read, are you in the school of thought that we existed and a lot of the current technologies, maybe even more advanced we had before, and then we either destroyed ourselves or we had something that hit us and we have to restart again? Where are you at with that?
Well, I'm of the mind that we need to consider that as a realistic possibility, because think about it. We come from basically feudalism, subsistence farming, hunting-gathering, all within the last 300 years to a millennium. Look how fast we've progressed since the scientific enlightenment. I make the point sometimes that when my grandparents were born in the 1890s, the primary mode of transportation around the planet was horseback, horse-covered wagons, mule, foot. Now, we had trains. Yeah, we've had trains since actually around the time of the Civil War. But, Civil War, what are we looking at? We're looking at less than 2 centuries ago. Now, if you look at how far we've progressed in the last 300 years, since the time of Newton and Galileo and Kepler and all of those guys, and the founding of modern science. Now we consider, I use the more conservative based on hard skeletal evidence of how long have modern humans been on the planet. And basically, I think what I'm seeing now is evidence, skeletal remains, hard evidence, 175 to 200,000 years old, that appears to belong to, for all intents and purposes, modern humans, which would imply similar levels of intelligence. Now, I think if you work it out, the numbers on it, and I should have brought my calculator in, but if you work out 200,000 years, there we go. Suggests modern humans were in Europe more than 200,000. Now, this is recent research, right? So 200,000 years, that works out to be about 7,000 generations, I think. Now, how easily could a millennia of human progress get lost in the noise of 200,000 years? Now, one of the things that I came prepared to show you today, that the legends of gigantic world-destroying floods are based on real events that we can now prove overwhelmingly, right? I'm about to lead an expedition, a tour in September, to show people some of the landscapes that are created by what I would call biblical scale floods up in the Pacific Northwest. You might want to think about coming on one of the future tours, because it'll blow your mind when you spend a week out and looking at these landscapes. And you'll come away just like that epiphany I had looking over the Minnesota River Valley. Except this now is like that times 1,000, because I concentrate. We go to specific places within where these gigantic floods have sculpted the landscape, and I teach people how to decipher the landscape, showing how these catastrophic, cataclysmos, Greek term for world-destroying floods, from which we get the world. Yeah, there we go. So if you look down there, the brown that forms the border between Oregon and Washington, we're going to be exploring in that area in there through the Cascade Mountain Range, because that brown that you see is the pathway of the melting floodwaters from the ice sheets out to the Pacific Ocean. And those flood discharges, peak discharges, you're looking at somewhere between peak discharges 700 million to a billion cubic feet per second. Now, how do you even picture something like that? Well, it's on such a scale, grand scale, that you can't really until you've spent a week. Now, what I do is I put together a program, and in my slides, I've got samples of what I show people prior to going out in the field. And I teach them about, I call it the hidden cipher of the landscape, because it's on such a huge scale that most people don't even know it's there. And then what I do is I say, it's like learning a new language. And what I'm going to do is we're going to a foreign country where everything is in this language you don't understand. So I'm going to teach you the rudiments of that language, and then we're going to go to that foreign country, and you're going to be able to read. Only in this case, the cipher, the alphabet, the story is engraved into the planetary surface. And it's been laying there for 10, 12, 14,000 years because nobody had the perspective to decipher it until now, basically. And then I say, that's a pretty grandiose statement to make, but give me a week, 2 weeks, and I will instruct you in that language, and we will go into the field, and I will show you the after effects of biblical scale floods that have swept over the earth. Now, how do you explain that? Well, I believe that the evidence shows that the great ice sheets, that there was a multi-impact event at the end of the last ice age. That's what destroyed the ice sheet. It also probably plunged into the ocean. Plunging into the ocean is going to inject, just like Hunga Tunga Hunga, it's going to inject gigantic amounts, except way beyond Hunga Tunga Hunga, is going to inject that water vapor into the atmosphere, upper stratosphere. It's going to encircle the planet, and it's going to rain out with these hellacious rainfalls that could take weeks to rain out. And I can show you, if we want to go to the slides while we got some time left, go right up to the beginning. Go to the top there, Rob. And, okay, there's one of my favorite quotes. Go to the title slide. Okay, go to play. Okay, I call this the big picture, understanding the true measure of global change. So we'll scan through a few things. Love this quote, historian Will Durant, one of the great historians of civilization. After writing 11 volumes, this was his conclusion. Civilization exists by geological consent, subject to change without notice.
That's the part. So to me, when we're talking extinction, the key words in that quote is what? Without notice.
Yeah. Without notice.
If it's going to happen, so you're talking about the flooding. Let me ask the question about Noah's Ark. So a story comes out, Rob, if you can play that clip, the one article I sent you that says archaeologists think they might have found the real Noah's Ark. Did you read this article? Have you looked into this or no?
Probably.
Where it says a mountain in Turkey shows evidence of human activity in the area around the biblical
Mount
flood
Ararat.
is said to be Mount Ararat, which that's the Armenian name, mountain. Archaeologists lived there. They discovered the final location of Mount Ararat, Mount Noah's Ark. Soil samples from the top to highest peaks in Turkey reveal human activity and marine materials. Dating of the rock and soil from the location match with biblical timing of Noah's Ark. Researchers from a trio of University of Turkey and United States have spent roughly a year analyzing the rock and soil in the famous Duripanar Formation on Mount Ararat, the highest mountain in Turkey. They believe that the boat-shaped site may hold the ruins of the legendary Noah's Ark. The biblical account of Noah tells God instructed Noah to build a giant ark to spare his family and pair of animals from an impending flood meant to destroy the evil and wickedness running rampant on earth. Noah's Ark is said to have come to rest on the mountains of Ararat following a 150-day flood about 5,000 years ago.
Yeah, Duripanar. Right, there it is. Yeah, I mean, the thing is when you look into the biblical Hebrew for the description of the ark, it's usually the ark is built of gopher wood, which in the Hebrew is gimel pei resh, but it had an alternate meaning, gimel pei resh. You can look that up. I've done quite a bit of research on that, and it actually originally meant papyrus reeds. And the earliest known shipbuilding techniques were papyrus reeds, but it was further. They went, the pitch that was used on it, I think, was part of the whole system that they used. This would be a whole discussion in itself, Pat, that would be very interesting to get into.
Tell me about it. I want to know a little bit about it. I'm curious myself. I'm Armenian. I'm Assyrian. So
yeah.
So what are we looking at right there?
Well, we're looking at it's about 430 feet long.
Okay.
Which is not the Hebrew cubit modern Hebrew cubit, standard cubits, up 18 inches, which is where we get to 300 cubits at 18 inches would be, 450 feet. This thing is a little bit longer than that, which suggests it was not using the modern Hebrew cubit, or that the Bible is not referring to the modern Hebrew cubit, but perhaps even the Egyptian cubit, which was longer. Egyptian cubit was, about 21.6264. Look up royal cubit. I think it'd be about 20.62 inches in length, royal cubit. So this thing is 300 cubits long. Yeah, there's your common cubit, 18. Yeah, royal cubit, 20.64. So that thing that we were just looking at works out to be about 300 cubits if we're using the royal cubit rather than the modern Hebrew cubit, which is a coincidence. And the controversy over that thing, it's been around for years. 30 or 40 years ago, David Fassold wrote a really interesting book, I think came out in the 70s or early 80s, on that site. And, it was a lot of controversy whether it was natural or something not natural. And so I haven't kept up with the research, but this may be, there he is right there. Now that's a drogue stone that he's standing next to. And you see a big stone like that? It's got that hole in it. So if you've got an anchor chain or a rope, it goes through that hole and you drag it behind the boat in order to keep the keel aligned parallel with the current. Because if the keel gets out of parallel with the current, then it's gonna swamp. I've done a lot of canoeing, and I knew, when you're on a fast-moving river, you want to keep your keel aligned with the current, because as soon as it turns, transverse to the current, you're going to flip. So the drogue stone is towed behind the ship, and that keeps the keel aligned. So there are these really big drogue stones that have been found. Now, what ships were they? I don't know. But I think David Fassold was speculating that some of the big ones may have even been associated with ark-sized ships. And it's bizarre, but if you come over to North America and you look at legends of Native Americans, there was giant floods, and basically how they survived mostly was a couple of the primary ways they survived these giant floods that swept over the country and wiped out their ancestors was either a high mountain, which now would be a sacred mountain, or a great canoe. That was translated as a great canoe. Now, that has been dismissed by historians and archaeologists, saying that, well, they must have learned the story of Noah from missionaries, and then they grafted that onto their own religious traditions and so on. But that can be dispelled, because we know that people like George Catlin, who was the Indian artist, who, when he spent decades and traveled and lived amongst dozens and dozens of Indian tribes. And he recorded all of their traditions and their beliefs. Rob, if you look up George Catlin, Caitlan, I believe, Indian artist, he recorded their accounts. And I have a great quote from him at the end of his book called Last Rambles. And basically he's saying that he went to all of, there's some of his artwork, George Catlin, not Caitlin. So at the end of his book, The Last Rambles, he's talking about the traditions of Native Americans. And he says that there was such a diversity of language and symbolism and beliefs and all that, but they all had one thing in common, and that was their belief that there had been this great flood. Now, what I've done is I've shown, absolutely, we can prove that there were great floods, certainly in North America, but it's showing up, the evidence for these gigantic floods is showing up all over the planet. And they're directly related to the Pleistocene, the extinction of the megafauna. Because when you have a big flood, one of the things it does is it rips up part of the earth in one place and then dumps it somewhere else. You have erosion and you have deposition. Well, if an animal is caught in a flood and they're not completely ending up getting disarticulated, their remains will then wash down and be found in the flood deposits. most of the remains, the fossilized remains of megafauna that we find, are in megaflood deposits, in gravel pits, peat bogs, permafrost. So it looks to me like there was two factors. And if the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is true, which is appearing to be more and more so the case, it means you had simultaneous huge fires followed by huge floods. So what the fires didn't wipe out, the floods finished the job.